Welcome to Indie Journal. So today we are talking about we are conducting a series of interviews about the ongoing agricultural protest in Delhi, mainly from farmers in Punjab, Haryana, Rajasthan, and even Maharashtra, related to the three farm bills that were passed in September by the current government. And we are speaking to various people regarding this, scholars, political activists, and agricultural activists. So today we are speaking with Professor R. Ramakumar. He is an MSc in agricultural economics, a PhD in economics, and is currently a professor at the Center for Developing Economies School of Development Studies in TIS, Mumbai. And his areas of research are agrarian studies, agricultural economics, development economics. Welcome, Professor Ramakumar. Welcome to Indie Journal. And as you know, we are talking about the ongoing, in context of the ongoing protest in Delhi. These are some of the most massive farmers' protests that we have seen in more than in many decades, you could say. And these point us towards some very important and crucial questions about India's agriculture. So my first question would be, as a research scholar in agriculture, uh, how would you look at these three farm bills that were passed in September, um, in their structure, in their wording, in their structure? How would you look at it in that way, as a bill?
See, the first point about the three farm acts that have been brought about by the center is that these can be argued to be unconstitutional also. I believe that the subject matter of the three farm acts are actually belonging to the legislative domain of the states of India and not the central government. According to entry 14 in the state list, agriculture is a part of the state, the responsibility of the states. But the center has decided to take over this responsibility with these three farm acts, which I think was unfortunate. Neither was any discussion done with the states, nor is the central government the appropriate person to legislate on these affairs. That's the first problem. The second problem with these acts is that these are brought about in order to achieve certain objectives. Right? What are these objectives? The government says that the farmer will get a better price as a result of these farm acts. The farmer will have more choice to sell his or her produce to whoever he or she wants. The farmer will also face much less trouble from middlemen as a result of these legislations, and so on. If you look closely, I'm now talking about only one legislation, that is APMC legislation. If you look at that legislation closely, you will see that if you also look at the kind of literature that you have, studies, research that has been conducted on agricultural markets in India over so many years, you will see that in India, the freedom to sell to whoever he wants is already available to the Indian farmer in a de facto sense. Right? Only about 30% of the paddy produce is actually sold through a mandi. Only about 40% of the wheat produce is sold through a mandi. The rest is all sold to a village trader in the village, or an input dealer, or something like that. So this freedom is already available to the Indian farmer. It's in a de facto sense. Why is it? This is largely because the Indian farmer, the small and marginal farmers of India, most of them either do not have a mandi nearby their locality, or their produce is so small, because they're small and marginal farmers, that it is not economical for them to bear the transport costs to take it to a nearby mandi and sell it. So they dispose it off in the village itself. The second problem is that a lot of these states have already legislated on some parts of the three farm acts of the center. Many states already allow for private markets outside the APMC. Many states already allow for direct purchase of companies from farmers. Many states already allow contract farming, etc. So if you look at the experience of these states where these permissions have already been given, the experience is not very positive. because no big private investment has come into private markets, into direct collection from farmers and so on. Why is this? This is because, again, I go back to this point about small and marginal farmers. Because of their predominance, the companies actually do not find it profitable to go to the rural areas and procure from each and every farmer. If you look at the United States, Europe, etc., if you want 10,000 tons of a particular product, you can go to a handful of farmers and you can get that product from them, because they're really, even the small farmer there is large, in the absolute sense. But if you come to India, that 10,000 tons would require purchase from lakhs of farmers sometimes. So you'll have to strike a deal with each farmer, grade their produce, open a rural collection center for this, do storage, transport. All these costs are involved, apart from staff costs, administrative costs, etc. All these are high transaction costs. And because these transaction costs are very high, many private companies of India, including these big firms like Reliance Fresh, hardly go to the farmer to purchase directly from them. They actually much prefer going to a mandi and purchasing it bulk from the mandi. So you will actually see that private investment in agricultural markets is very unlikely to come, even if these legislations are made. So the farmer has two problems here. One, if mandis are weakened and private markets come in their place, let's assume that they come in their place, then the farmer fears that mandis actually get you some good price. The mandis actually provide you, even if not an MSP. MSP in mandis is available only if the mandi is also a procurement center. But even if the mandi is not a procurement center, there is some element of factoring in of the MSP that takes place in the price formation in the mandis. But that kind of respect for MSP will not be applicable in the case of a private market. So if mandis are weakened and private markets take their place, then the farmers fear that remunerative prices will not be available to them anymore. Now, the second possibility is mandis are weakened and private markets do not come in their place because of high transaction costs. If that happens, then the farmer fears that he is likely to be left in the lurch. That means there will be complete vacuum created in the rural market space. There will be anarchy, chaos, and the farmer again will be left to the mercy of unscrupulous and unregulated private traders. Right? So whichever way you go, the farmer fears that his market will actually shrink. His access to a better price will shrink. That is why, despite all the big claims made by the government that you'll get a high price, that you will have the freedom to sell and so on, the farmer is not impressed at all in any form. Regarding the claim of middlemen, it is just that a new middleman will take the role of the old middleman. The company, due to multiple outsourcing that it might do, will send agents to the countryside and so on. So as a result, it is likely that the old middleman is likely to be replaced by a new middleman, but the middleman will remain, right? Because somebody has to do the job of aggregation of small producers in the countryside. That has to be done by somebody. If the company is unlikely to do it because of high transaction costs, so there will be some middleman who will still take up that role and fill that space. So the farmer, as a result, is not at all impressed with all these claims made by the government, and hence the struggle.
Okay, so we'll come back to some of the specifics in later questions. But one thing particularly I want you to expand upon is that you mentioned even in your column in the Hindu, you call this constitutional adventurism. So could you just expand on this part, how it is constitutional adventurism as a behavior of the center?
Yes, I mentioned in the early part that I find that the central government should not have gone ahead with these three farm acts because they are rightfully states' affairs. So I also said that entry 14 of the state list lists agriculture as the legislative responsibility of the states. So as a result, anything that is ancillary or subsidiary to that entry also comes under the legislative domain of the state. What the central government has done now is to use a little loophole that is available in these constitutional provisions to enact a law at the central level. What has it done? According to entry 26 and 27 of the state list, that is production, supply, and distribution of goods within states. This entry 26 and entry 27 in the state list is actually subject to entry 33 in the concurrent list of the Constitution. Right? And that concurrent list of the Constitution places some of these also in the center's domain. Okay. So the center has used this indirect route, this bit of a loophole to enact the law. Now, entry 33 in the concurrent list was not there in the original Constitution. It was introduced as part of the third amendment of the Constitution in 1954. Even at that time, there was enormous controversy in the parliament. A number of discussions were held in the parliament as to why the central government should not undertake the third amendment of 54 and thereby introduce entry 33 into the concurrent list, because many parliamentarians, eminent among them, Ashoka Mehta, K.K. Basu, etc., they feared that a lot of the entry 33 of the concurrent list might be misused by the central government in the future to take up or usurp many of the responsibilities that are rightfully the states. In fact, the joint committee, parliamentary committee that went into that amendment, 7 members, eminent members of the parliament, also put out a dissent note saying the central government should not do this. Okay. However, it was passed because the government at that time had a brute majority. But that dissent note, that dissent raised by parliamentarians has actually become true now in 2020, when the same entry 33 of the concurrent list has been invoked by the central government to take up what are rightfully the state's responsibilities in legislation in agriculture. This is one problem. So the central government should not have done this. But then in a legal sense also there is a problem, because if the center and the state both legislate in an affair in the state list, as many Supreme Court verdicts have suggested in the past, including the Constitution Bench verdict of 2002 in the case ITC versus APMC Munger in Bihar. That Constitution Bench verdict very clearly stated that if there is the Central Act and the State Act on the same subject, the first thing to see is whether that act is in regard to a subject in the state list or the central list. If it's a central list, the central government has the role, no doubt about it. If it is in the concurrent list, then both might remain. But if it is in the state list, then the state act will remain dominant over the central act. That is a suggestion that is given there in the Constitution Bench verdict of 2002. So take all these things together, you will very clearly see that there is a very clear case that federal principles of the Constitution were violated in the case of the 3 Farm Acts. So this is why I think they are unconstitutional and they should be challenged in a Supreme Court.
Right. So in a way, can we say that these bills, apart from being anti-farmer as claims are, but apart from that, they are also a very big symbol of the rising strain between center-state relationships. The like the center's arm twisting of the states. It's a continuation of that behavior, we could say.
Yes, I would strongly believe so. I think this is a violation of federal principles of the Constitution. It has poor validity, poor legal validity, and it can also be called outrightly unconstitutional. I would also say that many of the earlier provisions that the earlier efforts that the central government made to, for example, force the states to pass model APMC acts as per what the center drafted it, also had this problem that the central government has said that many funds for agricultural marketing infrastructure will not be available to states if they do not pass the center's model APMC acts. So that was also a kind of forcible execution of the center's agenda, thrusting it upon the states. That was also not desirable. Now the central acts have taken it and elevated it to a higher level of violation of federal principles. That's my view.
Okay. So my next question would be, the general perspective towards the discussion about agriculture in the urban discourse, at least, is about looking at agriculture as a business and how it is risk prone like any other business. So what is the major issue according to you in looking at agriculture as any other business enterprise?
Look, I do not. There are two. There are two extremes here. One is to see agriculture in a purely romantic sense. That is, agriculture is a way of life, culture, and so on. I'm not a votary of that romantic view. On one side, on the other end is what you suggested, which is seeing agriculture purely as a business, purely as a commercial enterprise. That is also a problem. The truth lies somewhere in between. The truth is that in India, a large number of small and marginal farmers, a large number of members of the rural community continue to find agriculture as the only source of livelihood. If not the only source, certainly the major source of livelihood. There has been diversification of income sources, but agriculture continues to be a very important source of income. In India, what has happened is over the last many decades, India has had a very strange kind of structural change in the economy. That is, the share of agriculture in the GDP has come down to something like 14 or 15%, whereas the share of people working in agriculture has remained very high. By many estimates, it's about 45 to 55%, depending on the definition that you use. This means that if you put it crudely, 15 rupees is shared by about 50 people, whereas 85 rupees is shared by the remaining 50 people in an economy, right? So this means that per capita incomes in agriculture are extraordinarily low. An official survey of the NSSO found that the monthly income of an agricultural household in 2012-13, it's a bit dated, but still we can see the amount and sort of assess it on its own. It was about 6,400 rupees alone for an agriculture household. That must be for a 4 or 5 member household. So incomes are extremely low as a result in agriculture, and the urban discourse simply doesn't see this aspect of livelihood that is implicit in agriculture as a vocation, agriculture as a profession. It is not a business. It's a source of livelihood for millions of farmers in India who are also poor. So it is also extremely important that we protect that livelihood. And across the world, if you see, agriculture is highly subsidized. India actually does not subsidize agriculture to the extent that United States does or European Union does, and so on. So protection levels in agricultural sector in India are extraordinarily poor, low, and it needs to be raised as you develop as an economy. In India, the effort, unfortunately, is trying to restrict the protection that is offered to agriculture. That is unfortunate, and I hope the urban population understands this important facet of agriculture and its place in the economy.
As an extension of this same argument, there is a logic given that, or many economists would say that agricultural development in India has been ruined by state intervention and excessive subsidization, and some editorials of financial newspapers called it they said that because these are heavily subsidized, the farmers have become unproductive. Indian farmers have. So how would we look at that argument?
Well, the reality is that Indian agriculture is effectively taxed, not subsidized. That's what Indian government's numbers itself show, and that is what the Indian government itself says in its own representations to the WTO, and it says that is why we should be allowed to continue our MSP and so on. So by Indian government's own admission, Indian agriculture is taxed, not subsidized, while Western agriculture is highly subsidized. That's one matter. But the other matter is that, look, the whole question of whether there should be subsidy or not in agriculture should be judged on economic merits. Of course, everything and anything need not be subsidized. What is the Indian farmer saying? The Indian farmer is primarily saying for the last 25 to 30 years, because of the changes in subsidy structure with respect to many inputs of Indian agriculture, seeds, fertilizers, pesticides, electricity for water, pump sets, etc., diesel charges, etc. If you look at all these input costs and also add to it the labor costs, they have risen sharply over the last 20 to 25 years. This has led to a major increase in input costs in agriculture. Right. Now, that is the reason why the farmer asks always for a rise in MSP. He is asking for an increase in MSP commensurate with the increase in input costs in agriculture. Yeah. This is a very important aspect of Indian agriculture that we don't quite take note of. The government, on the other hand, does not look at the input side of the problem. That is how to reduce input costs and make agriculture more profitable, etc. It instead looks it also does not look at increase in MSP commensurate with the input cost as a solution. What it does is it looks at something outside input cost and outside MSP, which is agricultural marketing. It has been saying for a while now, many economists of the variety that you mentioned also say this, that the problem lies in agricultural marketing and not in agricultural production. They say that only if private markets come, only if huge private investment comes into value addition, only if huge private investment comes into storage, warehousing, etc., can the farmer's price in the consumer's rupee be increased. Now, of course, it is true that the farmer's price in the consumer's rupee is less, and that has to be improved. But the problem is that the government simply does not consider the input side of the problem at all, the cost side of the problem at all. It thinks that it can go on allowing input costs to rise by withdrawing subsidies on seeds, fertilizers, etc. And it will not affect farm economics as long as it does reforms in agricultural marketing. That, I think, is a highly inadequate view. That, I think, is also a flawed view. That what the government lacks at this point of time, and many commentaries also lack, is a view in totality of Indian agriculture, where input side is also seen, the production side is also seen as important in terms of viability, as is agricultural marketing. If you look at it like that, the picture completely changes, and you will have a different set of conclusions coming out of it.
My last question would be, it's a much larger question. Considering agriculture in the coming times, looking at it in the context of the coming times, one is the change in global trade patterns, and the second is the imminent climate collapse or the varying climate change patterns that we see. So, how do we look at agriculture in the coming times? How should we look as a society at agriculture in the coming times?
Look, agricultural production worldwide is rising. Agricultural output and surplus is actually rising worldwide. And as many studies have shown in the past itself, the elasticity of demand for agricultural goods, the increase in elasticity of demand for agricultural goods will be limited, because there is a limit to which demand for food can rise globally. And many new technologies are coming in agriculture, which are also raising productivity in agriculture in many crops. So to look at agricultural trade as a sustainable option of growth in the future is not a very rosy scenario in my view. There may be possibilities of export growth in some crops. I don't deny that. There will certainly be growth. But to see agricultural trade as an engine of growth is a little bit of a doubt in my view. It is not available for all crops. It is not available for all varieties. It is not available for all grades and so on. Particularly given the low global demand for food, which is likely to result from a prolonged slowdown of the global economy and so on, and because of which agricultural trade is likely to grow at a slower rate compared to in the past. Again, agricultural trade will be not a great instrument for revival of agricultural growth or anything of that sort in the near future. Agricultural trade will remain important. Exports will remain important in many crops. India exports a lot of agricultural commodity, and that should remain the focus, no doubt about it. But to see it as to see an export-oriented agricultural growth path and see that as the salvation path for agriculture will be a bit exaggerated. You have to look at domestic forms of consumption in the first place. This is one reason why I think India will have to look closely at how it treats its agriculture in the future. Right? It has to ensure that the farmer gets a better price for his or her produce through multiple means at its discretion. MSP should be one option. Also, better markets should be one option. I'm not doubting that. The better markets should be one option. Better viability of cultivation should be an option that should be considered. Across the world, as countries develop, supports to agriculture have risen. So India also will have to see higher supports to agriculture as it develops. But the unfortunate part of the Indian development experience has been, as I've said earlier, that you still have a large population in agriculture, and you have not been able to take that population out of agriculture in any form, thanks to different sets of policy mistakes that you have done in the past. So, as a result, this will be more complicated a task in India, no doubt. If you want to give cash to farmers in the United States, the number is only about 2%, 3%. But if you look at India, that number will be 40%, 50%. So obviously you will have a problem there. But that has to be taken care of. No, that is not a reason to simply ignore agriculture as a vocation that needs support. So that is a reason why India will have to a policy in agriculture at the national level should be one that should give broad directions, but the core responsibilities should remain with the states itself. They will know how to create customized solutions to different problems in agriculture. More freedom should be given to states. More resources should be passed on to states on how to deal with agriculture. They are the best judges as to how to shape and mold their agricultural sectors in the near future. So I'm not saying I have a very clear answer to your question, but I clearly can see what is not possible, what might not be rosy scenarios in the future. This is something that needs a lot of discussion among with farmers, economists, the government, and so on. Only then appropriate solutions will emerge. But very clearly, the tasks are more complex, the tasks are very serious, and there has to be discussions that have to begin as to how you will deal with the future of Indian agriculture, given the large population that is dependent on it.
This was a very enlightening conversation, Professor, and thank you for giving IndiJournal your time. And we'll keep having these conversations. I request the viewers to follow IndiJournal's social handles, share this video, share this interview with people who you think this might be useful for, and also donate to IndiJournal. We have a payment system on our website. So visit our website, read IndiJournal, and follow us. Thank you. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you very much.